MJBulls is proud to announce the third annual Hemptown USA Cannabis Investor Series. 18 of the cannabis industry's top investors share their insights on investing opportunities and trends. If you're a cannabis investor or a cannabis company that's raising money, you'll want to listen to all 18 episodes. Tune into the Raising Cannabis Capital podcast on Sunday, September 27th, as we'll announce all the names of all of this year's Hemptown USA cannabis investors. And then listen to all 18 episodes on the Raising Cannabis Capital podcast beginning October 1st. For too many years, families of children with devastating illnesses have felt helpless as they watch their child suffer. Today, they're taking matters into their own hands and finally finding relief treating their child with cannabis. These are their stories.
Hey guys, welcome to another episode.
Hello, hello, hello.
Yes, we have a special guest today, and this is going to be a really, really good show tonight.
So excited.
Yeah, especially for those who really want to know the insides of about medicinal cannabis as well as just herbals. We have a young lady here. Is that okay? I say young, right? We have.
I'm already blushing.
We have Dr. Zora DeGrandpre. Is I pronounce it correctly?
Yep. Correct.
You were in Vancouver, Washington, correct?
I was originally in Vancouver, Washington. Now I live in central Washington in a little town called Randall.
Wow. I hope you're safe out there because I know that a lot of things are happening and you're around your way.
Yep, it's a little bit smoky, but we're still good here.
Okay, great. And now I noticed that you had such an extensive background, and one of the things I saw that you were writing for professional journals and texts on botanical medicine as well as pharmacology, interactions with herbs and supplements, and then you worked with the elderly group and also with children with epilepsy. So you have so much. I just want to get an idea, like, who, what, where, and when, and why. All in one. Like, what drove you and said, this is what my path is going to be? Because this is not like a...
Oh, that's a big question.
I know. Loaded guns, right?
Yeah, I told you.
Yeah. So I've always loved science. I've always been, a mini science geek when young, a maxi science geek now. It's always attracted me. I was always curious. Originally, I ended up there, but originally I wanted to become a physician and went to the University of Buffalo, UB, go.
Yes.
And started out in biology, but, I wanted a bit more, and a friend of mine talked me into what I thought was a really cool area called medicinal chemistry. It's drug design. And so I graduated with a degree in drug design and then spent some time getting a master's degree in immunology at Roswell Park Cancer Institute. And then moved over with my husband at the time to Long Island and spent time in the neuroimmunology labs at Stony Brook. And then, kind of settled in. But then after a divorce, I was teaching. And, I was teaching AP chemistry, single parenting, teaching. It worked for me. And ended up meeting my current husband, who at first we met online. Long story, I won't go into it. Fell in love. I'm moving, once my kids had graduated high school, I'm moving to the West. And I had originally applied to what was called then Western States Chiropractic School as a teacher, and they must have gotten my letter mixed up, and they accepted me as a student, sent me a scholarship, and I'm thinking, okay, this is the way the universe wants to go, all right. And then was diagnosed after 1 year at the chiropractic school. Wasn't really good at physical adjustment, so it was probably a good move.
Wait
I was
a
diagnosed
minute.
with
So,
skin cancer.
wow.
And went to the naturopathic school. and went from there, got my degree. So I'm a naturopathic physician, and in Washington State, we're primary care licensed physicians, and started a practice. Then events after events after events, ended up getting very ill myself, and as part of my recovery process, started writing. And, I still see patients, but I spend a lot of time, especially in the last few months, writing anything on science and medicine. So I've been writing a lot about COVID-19. I've been writing a lot about, I've been writing grants for, local school districts for distance learning. But a large part of my work has been with CBD, because it was one of those things that I never understood why there was, why it was Schedule 1, why cannabis was Schedule 1.
We still don't understand why.
I had tried it. It wasn't my drug of choice. That's all there is to it. People have preferences. But there was no scientific rationale. And if you want to get me kind of crazy, is to do something with no scientific rationale. So I, and then I was getting questions from patients. And as it turns out, the area that I moved to in central Washington during World War II was one of the greatest areas for farming of hemp. So it turned out there was like kind of a historic precedent. And so I started learning about it, started writing about it, started getting contacted by people, and, learning more and more about it as the research progressed. And so this is one of the areas that I particularly love to educate people about, because CBD particularly, all cannabinoids, except for THC, where you do, because of its intoxicating effect, you have to be more aware. But the cannabinoids in general have a really wide, what we call therapeutic window. And it's a wide window of safety, and it's a wide window where you can see positive effects. And to me, to have an irrational reason not to use it, because it's Schedule 1, or was Schedule 1, of course. So I was thrilled when in Washington State they expanded the both medical use and then later on the recreational use, which is, I think, it's an unfortunate way to describe it. But, I live in one of the states where there's this great open-mindedness, and certainly a lot, neighboring state of Idaho, where, you cannot do any of these things. And I've found more and more people have interest, more and more people have benefit for such a wide range of health conditions. And it's not a miracle. It's a plant substance that has beneficial effects for humans. And, when I don't prescribe an awful lot of, pharmaceuticals, but I don't object to it. My only objection is the misuse of drugs. It's not the use, the careful use, because I think these things can be used rationally and carefully and help such a wide group of people that it's a shame not to make the most of it.
So just to recap on your background, so you are a naturopath, correct?
Correct.
Can you explain to us what that means exactly?
So naturopaths, and I'm a little bit of an outlier because, I do have that background in drug design. And so I'm probably a little bit easier with using pharmacologics than a lot of others. But as a group, naturopaths will use botanical medicines primarily, lifestyle modifications, effects on the different choices people make in order to bring them back into equilibrium and health. So, for example, when it comes to, let's pull out heart disease, I will first if I can, work with an individual to change how they're eating, how they're exercising, how they're sleeping, how they're doing anger management, how they're doing relaxation techniques, how they're living their lives, and bring down, say it's high blood pressure, bring down their blood pressure in those ways. So I will use prescription medications, but it's only if absolutely necessary and until we can get them into a lifestyle that is modified sufficiently so that they don't need them, and then wean them off the medication. So it's a very old, it's based on, to a large extent, original European medicine and the eclectic movement in this country. And as I said, I'm very fortunate to live in a very progressive state. Washington was one of the first states to accept naturopaths as primary care physicians.
Oh.
So it's a primary care physician who emphasizes what you eat, how you exercise, how you live your life, and using botanical medicines as a first step rather than using, prescription medications.
Got it.
What's interesting about that is that's one thing I haven't been hearing, offshoot, but, basically during this time of COVID and this pandemic, that we don't hear anything about how to take care of yourself while you're on lockdown or while you're trying to overcome or deal with the illness if you did catch it. But the fact
I have to shout louder, don't I?
Yeah. Maybe.
Yeah, because there's no preventive. Like, how about we change our diets?
Well, in general, what I tell people is if you keep your immune system healthy,
Mm-hmm.
and that is mainly by diet, eating whole foods. We're mostly organic. I live on a farm. Most of we grow a good deal of our food, especially during the I should say my husband grows a good deal of our food. I grow flowers and herbs and mostly greens. But eating a healthy diet, and that's primarily whole foods, staying away from processed foods, staying away from sugar is probably one of the most important things. Staying away from sugar. Sugar acts like a toxin in a lot of ways. Exercising, having, I'm not going to say a positive mood is going to prevent COVID, not by any means. But I think if you can do all those things, keep yourself as healthy as possible by your diet and by your lifestyle choices, then your immune system should be in better shape to deal with COVID. Probably because, number one, you won't have any comorbidities going on, or at least they'll be relatively more under control.
Mm-hmm.
And because the immune system, I don't often use the words amazing, probably because they're overused, but this is what the immune system was designed for. Not designed for. This is what it evolved to do. And yes, it's a new novel virus, but as far as advice goes, there's no guarantee. But I think you put yourself into a better position if you stay healthy, stay exercise, stay calm,
Mm-hmm.
wear your mask,
Mm-hmm.
wash your hands, stay apart from people, even if they're your good friends, that, a virus doesn't recognize whether you're good friends or not. It doesn't care. And unfortunately, there have been too many people who don't trust the science, have been convinced otherwise. And, there's just so much one can do. And I just keep repeating myself. I didn't spend all this time learning stuff so that I can make this stuff up. This virus is behaving like a virus does, and one of my often used phrases is virus is going to do what a virus is going to do. There's nothing surprising about this. What's surprising is that so many people seem to think they can wave their hands around or it won't happen to them, or that somehow a mask is medical tyranny. And I have a bit of a tough time talking to people like that. But there you go. We still have to try, right?
Attention Cannabis Podcast listeners. You can now listen to your favorite cannabis podcast ad-free with the MJBulls mobile app. Just download the free MJBulls mobile app to your smartphone to start enjoying cannabis podcasts with no commercials. Go to Apple Apps or Google Play to get the MJBulls Cannabis Podcast app today.
Of course. Now, when working with your patients, let's say a child with epilepsy, do you encompass a holistic approach, including the herbs?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And then, of course, with a child, you're working also with the parents because, if the parents are going to give a 3-year-old fake little sausages because they're easy for that 3-year-old to hold, I've got to work with the parents to ensure that they're providing the dietary support that is needed. Then, with a young child, they probably are active depending on the state of their epilepsy and how often they have seizures. But you would also work in so that the parents understand the whole story of CBD. And I usually start by telling them the whole story of Charlotte Figley, and talk to them how it was discovered and how it was kind of serendipitous with the Stanley brothers finding they had this strain and what were they going to do with it, kind of thing. And so I explain to them and explain what we know of how it works. I give them mini lectures on the endocannabinoid system just so they have a real understanding of what the potential is. I talk to them about the therapeutic window, that with CBD it's a wide therapeutic window, and that to have patience, that it may take a while for the CBD to have a positive effect. And the biggest rule of thumb is to start low and to go slow. That even though the safety profile of CBD is great, as far as herbal medicines, plant-derived medicines, and there's a great deal of pharmacology behind this, which I probably won't. I'm assuming you don't want people to fall asleep on us, right? So I won't go into details on the pharmacology, but basically what it comes down to is because you're talking about a mixture of substances with plants, the entourage effect, which I think we mentioned before, hypothesizes that the mixture of cannabinoids and terpenes in a CBD oil will act similarly as they do in the plant. People are often shocked to know that the physiology of plants, bacteria, viruses, humans, mammals, fish are not all that different because nature tends to conserve what works. So that combination of, let's just call them phytochemicals, phytonutrients from the plants, tends to work in the same way. So the plant doesn't make substances that in the wrong pattern with the other plant constituents will cause harm, because it would cause harm to itself. And so I think that translates into using CBD oils or capsules or however the delivery method is. It kind of translates into it so that when you use the extract, the whole plant that contains high level, concentrated levels of CBD, but still is in combination with the other plant constituents, that's what creates that really wide window of safety. So we start low with the lowest dose that you can use. Say, for example, if you've got a young child and parents, we've gone through all the educational process and they've decided to try using CBD for their child. Say they want to go with gummies. So you cut them up, you find the lowest dose available, cut them up into quarters. and then or eighths if you have to, whatever it is, you start out with the lowest dose that you can, and you start giving that dose to the child and watching everything. I have a lot of patients do journaling, write everything down because you think you're going to remember. It's like, that grand event that you never took a picture of, or you did a remodel on your house, and you'll remember what an awful state it was in. But then all of a sudden, 2 years later, when you've sat in the remodel home, you're not quite remembering where that big hole in the wall was. So you journal, keep track of everything, keep track of the number of seizures, the types of seizures, how long they last, and then start recording. And you've got to give that initial dose a little bit of time, and it's very difficult because your child is hurting, your child is suffering, so to be watching that is very difficult. But then you slowly increase the dose by giving a quarter or half a gummy or whatever is the choice, or the oils. I tend to start kids off on gummies because they think it's a lot more fun, and that seems to work better a lot of times. And then you start increasing it very slowly, giving at least a few days between changes of doses and keeping track of everything. And then when you find that ideal dose, you can stick with it. You may cut back a little bit depending on where your child's progress is at. And then you may, sometimes people don't want to do one dose, so they may want to divide doses, and that can work beautifully. It all depends. We talk in medicine about personalized medicine. This is very personalized.
Yes.
So you really do have to, and I trust the parents because, parents know their kids better than anyone. I may be able to look, and I might have an observation or two that the parents hadn't really realized. But when it comes right down to it, I remember one of my first patients said to me, you're the first doctor who's ever believed me. And this was a gentleman who was about 55 years old, and I said to him, so how old are you? And he said 55. And I said, and you've had this body your entire life? He looked at me like I was a lunatic, said, yeah. I said, well, then, as a first step, I'm going to believe you. You may have a different way of expressing it. I may translate it in my notes as something else, more technical. But, yes, I'm going to believe you. And same with parents. They know their child. Sometimes the rose-colored glasses stay on a bit too long. But they know their child, so they know the differences. They know the differences in behaviors. They know certainly the differences if you have a child who's having 30, 40, or even more seizures a day. When that number's been affected. When you... And when you see an improvement in behaviors.
True.
So it really follows what the parents and, depending on the age of the child, what they're saying. And most kids, I think, probably are just thrilled that this is slowing down.
Yeah. Yes, that's true.
So it is an awful lot of work with parents. But, once that controlling dose, we'll call it that, is achieved, what a relief. Yeah. What a relief. And then you can work from there. But you've got a place from which you can work that's, the stress level has been reduced both on the parent and the child, because kids go through stress.
Absolutely.
It might be all they're aware of at the time. This is natural, normal to them. But once the number of seizures has decreased, I think I'm gonna shout it out. Most kids are like, "Whoa, yeah. I can do this, I can do that now."
Yeah.
They may not phrase it that way. So once that plateau is reached, then you can fine tune it. Then you can adjust things as works in your family. But the education part is really important, because if people don't buy into it, they won't stick with it.
That is so true. We've seen that where we have a family friend who started using CBD for her son's ailment, and after a week or two, maybe even a month, decided to stop. It's not working. In their mind, they're like, it does not working, until they stopped and realized, oh, maybe it was. So my question to you about DNA. Well, I know we had done for my son, because of his epilepsy, that we did a DNA test and genetics test. And it came out with reports stating there might have been some type of defect or some sort, which I wasn't really buying into. But as it relates to CBD, do you think there's a correlation between a person's DNA and a specific strain or plant?
This is all going to be speculation, because there's not a lot of research, at least not a lot of research that I'm aware of. But DNA is the sequence of nucleotides that define the genes. The genes make proteins. Proteins do most of the hard work in the body. There's something called epigenetics, which when I first read one of the original papers on it, I was just like, I was doing what I call the happy naturopath dance. It really looks stupid. Okay, don't. Thankfully, we're not on video. But it was a happy naturopath dance because I was such a science geek, and so dedicated to science. There were times in naturopathic medical school where, the professional group is going to love me for this, but I call them fluffernutters. They wave their hands around a lot and say amazing and awesome. But when you say, what exactly is this particular herb doing? They're like, I don't know. And, to me, waving your hands around and saying awesome and amazing is kind of worthless if you don't know how something is working. So when I first read this paper on epigenetics, it settled a lot of things that I'd been learning about and had basic faith in, but wanted to have a scientific basis for it. Epigenetics is above genetics. So it's how the gene expression is controlled, and that can be controlled by diet, exercise, your outlook on life, basically your mood, and, that huge tent that is covered by mood. So to go back to your question, it is, to my mind, theoretically very possible that different genes are expressed in different ways, at different times based on your lifestyle as a whole, where those genes are expressed in different ways, can also affect, so there's two basic receptors for endocannabinoids and for the cannabinoids, CB1 and CB2. CBD it doesn't directly bind it. We usually use the analogy of lock and key. But CBD is more like, it's more a bit like Play-Doh coming around the lock and changing the shape of the lock a little bit. So it works a little bit differently than, say, for example, THC or the endocannabinoids. But to my mind, it is absolutely possible, though I don't think, as far as I know, it's been described yet, that there are different isotypes of receptors that would respond to CBD in slightly different ways. On top of that, while humans like to do these classifications, the body doesn't necessarily work that way. So there's the CB receptors, but there's also an ever-growing number of receptors that perform different functions, and that CBD and other cannabinoids bind to. So it is theoretically absolutely possible that with one person with one genetic profile is going to respond to CBD in one way, and someone else is going to respond in another way, and that the answer is how the genetic expression is affecting the binding, and how the biochemistry responds to that. And the other side of the coin is that the different chemovars or different strains of hemp plant or cannabis, and no one for 250 years, no one's been able to figure out, the different, which is a substrain, which is a strain, how these all interrelate. Cannabis is an ancient plant, and I guess it's old enough to fool us. So let's just use chemovar as a particular clone of plants that has a particular profile. So if you've got two different chemovars of hemp plant that provides mostly CBD, in theory, it's absolutely possible that those two chemovars are going to affect a single person differently because the profile, and that's the entourage effect, how the mixture of cannabinoids and terpenes will affect someone. Was that too long of an answer?
It was very informative because I haven't heard that interpretation before, so that's good. Thank you very much for that.
Sure.
So what I'm going to do is that right now we're at our 30-minute mark, so we're going to turn this into a 2-part episode because it has really gotten good, and oh man, I'm looking forward to coming back. So folks, please tune in.
I get to talk to you guys again?
Yes.
Of course. We're welcoming you back. We're welcoming you back.
I'm doing the happy naturopath dance.
There you go. Well, folks, please tune in to our next episode as we speak with Dr. Zora DeGrandpre out in Washington, in the state of Washington, a small town.
In central Washington, between 3 volcanoes.
Awesome. I can imagine the view.
And in a national forest.
Wow.
Yep.
That must be a beautiful scenery.
I will send you pictures.
Please do. All right, guys. Please tune in for the next episode. All right. Good night.
Thanks for tuning in.
All right.
Thank you.